Griselda Blanco, the godmother of cocaine. The streets of Miami in the 1970s and 80s weren't just alive, they were electric with chaos. Nights echoed with the sound of gunfire, the air stung with tension, and fortunes exchanged hands at breakneck speed. This was the cocaine boom, and one name ruled over this tumultuous empire: Griselda Blanco, the godmother, the Black Widow, La Madrina. Driven by unrelenting ambition and nerves of steel, Griselda built a billion-dollar empire in a man's world, becoming one of the most ruthless and cunning figures in the history of organized crime. Her brilliance was as sharp as her cruelty, and her boldness shattered gender norms in an industry defined by violence and greed. But with great power comes great enemies, and Griselda's reign came at a chilling cost. Tonight we unravel her story, a tale of terror, strategy, and a rise so meteoric it could only end in tragedy. Ready to meet the most dangerous queen Miami has ever known? Griselda Blanco was born in Cartagena, Colombia, in 1943, a period marked by widespread poverty and violence. But even amidst this harsh environment, her life story stood out for its sheer despair and darkness. Her family relocated to Medellin when she was young, settling in a slum notorious for its unrelenting brutality. By the time she was 11, Griselda had already committed shocking acts, including allegations of orchestrating a kidnapping and killing at a tender age. The streets raised her more than her family did, molding her into someone who had no hesitation when it came to survival. Despite her tumultuous upbringing, Griselda showed early signs of brilliance, not in academics but in cunning and street smarts. These traits would later catapult her to infamy as one of the deadliest figures the drug trade had ever seen. By the early 1970s, Griselda had found her way to New York City. Here, the burgeoning cocaine trade offered opportunities for anyone bold enough to seize them. Griselda, with her sharp instincts and knack for strategy, quickly got involved in trafficking operations. But she wasn't just another player. In New York, she began smuggling cocaine from Colombia into the United States, often using ingenious methods. From hidden compartments in shipments to human mules carrying drugs in intimate body spaces, her operations were as innovative as they were audacious. But trouble wasn't far behind. Griselda's expanding operations caught the eye of authorities. Facing federal charges, she fled to Miami, a city that would soon become the stage for her meteoric rise, and a bloody war that would define her legacy. In Miami, Griselda saw untapped potential. The city's nightlife, luxury, and growing population of wealthy drug users made it a perfect market for cocaine. She quickly took charge, outsmarting competitors and forging a pipeline to smuggle vast quantities of the drug directly from Colombia. Her empire grew not just because of her intelligence, but also because of her willingness to be brutal. She didn't just compete, she eliminated. Griselda's business thrived on fear, and she wasn't afraid to demonstrate exactly what would happen to anyone who crossed her. By the mid-70s, Griselda built one of the largest cocaine distribution networks in the United States. While most women in her world took on subordinate roles, she broke through the ranks, commanding an entire empire, something almost unheard of at the time. Lavish wealth followed, with multi-million-dollar mansions, luxury cars, and unfathomable riches. But the darker side of her success was never far behind. Griselda was nothing short of a trailblazer in crafting smuggling methods that were both effective and elusive to authorities. Her reputation as a pioneer in narco-trafficking was often attributed to her creativity. She utilized everything from fake compartments in luggage to strategically bribed officials and violently enforced control over her supply chain. Her network of loyalists ensured her product flooded U.S. cities, earning her millions of dollars a day. But even as she expanded her operation, she surrounded herself with a circle of hitmen, the backbone of her security and the tools of her dominance. Through all this, Griselda's personal life painted a complicated picture. She married multiple times, and each relationship was shrouded in drama, betrayal, or even murder. Her nickname, the Black Widow, stemmed from the suspicion that she disposed of her husbands as quickly as she eliminated her enemies. Violence was the very foundation of her empire. Anyone who crossed her, rivals, lovers, or even members of her own cartel, often met a swift and deadly end. Griselda was in no way shy about ordering executions, and her infamy skyrocketed thanks to her sheer audacity. One of her signature tools of terror was the infamous motorcycle assassins. This method of assassination, gunmen on motorcycles carrying out quick and precise hits, became a hallmark of her reign, a tactic so effective it spread beyond her organization. Her thirst for dominance led Miami into the Cocaine Cowboy Wars, a series of bloody confrontations between rival cartels vying for control of the lucrative trade. The years marked by these wars saw a terrifying spike in violence, with body counts soaring as factions slaughtered one another for power. Griselda's role in this bloodshed cemented her as a fearsome figure in the annals of crime. But even as her enemies multiplied, she refused to flinch. By the early 1980s, Griselda's actions had drawn the full attention of federal authorities. Her violent clashes, public execution-style killings, and lavish lifestyle made her difficult to ignore. In 1985, after years of evading justice, the authorities finally caught up with her. She was arrested and eventually sentenced to prison on multiple drug trafficking charges. Even behind bars, her influence lingered. She reportedly continued to run her empire from her cell, leveraging loyalties and decades of fear to retain control. However, cracks in her organization began to show. Rivals gained strength, and her loyalists wavered. After serving over a decade in prison, Griselda Blanco was released in the early 2000s and deported to Colombia. The world she returned to, however, was no longer her own. Rivals and a younger generation had taken over the narcotics trade, leaving her empire in ruins. Living in relative obscurity in Medellin, she kept a low profile. The grandeur that once defined her existence faded, and Griselda became a shadow of the woman who once ruled entire cities. Yet enemies never truly forget, and Griselda knew she lived under the constant threat of revenge. In a tragic twist of fate, Griselda Blanco met the same end she had orchestrated for countless others. On a quiet afternoon in 2012, as she left a butcher shop in Medellin, a man on a motorcycle approached her. Without hesitation, he pulled the trigger, killing her instantly, a death eerily reminiscent of the methods she had perfected decades earlier. Her murder marked the end of an era, but left behind lingering questions about her legacy. Was this revenge, a calculated vendetta by a rival family? Or was it simply karma catching up with one of the bloodiest figures in the drug trade? Griselda Blanco occupies a unique place in the history of organized crime. As a pioneer in the cocaine trade, and one of the few women to rise to such prominence in the violent corridors of the cartel world, her story is both legendary and cautionary. In popular culture, she's been immortalized through documentaries, movies, and TV shows, cast as both a villain and a trailblazer. She shattered gender norms, proving that even in a world dominated by men, she could wield terror and power as effectively and ruthlessly as any male counterpart. But her legacy also serves as a chilling reminder of the destructive power of greed and ambition. For all her brilliance and dominance, Griselda's life was one of chaos, betrayal, and violence, leaving behind only a trail of destruction and death. And so Griselda Blanco, the godmother of cocaine, both fascinates and horrifies us. A queen who ruled her empire with blood and brilliance, but ultimately paid the price for living by the sword. The streets remember her, her enemies feared her, and history will never forget her. A legend, a monster, and an unforgettable force in the annals of crime.